One of the things we have been seeing since 2009, so almost, say, 15 years now, because in 2009 was the year that the Android phone came to India. And so many more people started using mobile phones. Since then, year on year, we have been seeing a rise in what is called online or digital gender based violence. Now, this kind of digital gender based violence takes many different forms. It's usually based on either text or images. This kind of digital gender based violence actually takes many forms. It's usually based on words or on images, and we see it across all the platforms that are most common in India, right? So whether it's WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the Hindi version of TikTok, which is called Tiki, many other apps. And it has become a major barrier for women, girls, trans, and non binary persons in India to meaningfully access the internet. Because access is not just an issue of infrastructure, access is also an issue related to social conditions. So, what we are seeing is that there is so much online violence on a day to day basis that women, girls, and trans persons, not all, but some, are either inhibiting their participation online, right? So they're either censoring themselves online, going off platforms for a little while, etc. So I think the big issue when it comes to access and gender based violence is that you may have access to digital spaces, but if you face acute, chronic, or everyday gender based violence in digital spaces, you will either, your access to these spaces will become restricted, either because that is a huge deterrent. So I think we really have to look at all the different forms of gender based violence. I think we have to take it very seriously and understand what is driving this kind of gender based violence. Is it patriarchy? Of course, patriarchy is the root cause. Is it gender norms being replicated online from offline spaces? Of course, that's a contributor. Is it the disinhibition effect? The fact that you're behind a screen makes you somehow feel free to do whatever you want to without thinking of the consequences. Sure, that's part of it. Is it that for some people they just don't see this as doing anything wrong, right? Or is it that in certain cases where you are really seeing sort of mob violence, that there are entities called the cyber troops who are being engaged to actually inflict this form of violence, right? So there's many, because it's an emerging form of violence. What we know about it at this stage is not enough. We know that it happens, we know that it takes many different forms in India, from, say, abusive tweets or abusive posts to misogynist trolling, harassing statements, harassing blank calls on phones. I want to mention here that even in rural areas where there are many, in low income communities, there are many girls and women who don't have smartphones, but they still face digital harassment through SMSs and through blank calls and other kinds of harassing calls. And this has very grave consequences on the mental health of those who face this violence and on the emotional health, and of course can endanger physical safety as well. But I feel it's very important that we not just say that, oh, if somebody's physical safety is not affected, it's not serious enough. It is serious enough because it is already affecting your sense of emotional and mental well being and your sense of self, right? It's taking away your dignity, your sense of personhood and autonomy. So I think this is really the issue when it comes to access. And I think if we think about mobility as both physical and digital, it also takes away your digital mobility because you become careful about where you'll go online, who you'll speak to online, right? This is how mobility looks online. One of the key building blocks to moving this work ahead in the future, I think, is understanding, knowledge, and research. Because it is still a new or emerging form of violence, it's still not taken as seriously as it deserves to be taken. So we need a great deal of knowledge to be created at many levels. One is we need to know what this form of violence looks like for different groups of women, right? For instance, say, what does online violence look like for women with disabilities in India? We don't know. Or what does online violence look like for trans women in India? Again, we don't know, right? And again, we can look at this across income categories. I think the second thing is to really do some research and knowledge building on what are the methods that are currently available for people to feel more safe in these environments. Are these methods effective? I think it would be useful to also get some sense from people who've tried to use methods online, like reporting to platforms, etc., to see whether or not these are effective and what else can be done. Are there other remedies that we've overlooked that can be explored? And at the same time, there are always dimensions of violence, right? For instance, say researching the mental and emotional health consequences of online violence and demonstrating that it has a serious impact could be of great use in terms of convincing policymakers to give this more attention. So it's sort of think of it almost like a new domain, right? Where just like maybe 10% of it has been explored, or even what does privacy mean for, say, low income women in slum communities or in rural communities, right? So there are many dimensions of this that actually need to be built out and knowledge created for this agenda to move forward.